In the summer of 1966, the United States Marines have been fighting in Vietnam for more than a year, and almost everyone they have killed and buried has been a guerrilla. The enemy they know is the Viet Cong, local, lightly armed, hidden among the villages of the coastal lowlands. Then in July, near the strip of land along the 17th parallel that is supposed to be the one place in Vietnam where the war does not reach, the Marines run into something they have not faced before. Uniformed soldiers in disciplined formations, heavy machine guns sighted on the high ground, an entire regular division of the North Vietnamese Army, 10,000 strong, dug into the hills of Quang Tri province with the stated mission of seizing the province outright.
The North Vietnamese were building up in this area to the south of the DMZ. We believe that there are as many as 3 regiments in this area, and as a result we have engaged in an operation along with the 1st ARVN Division in this area, with the ARVN Airborne in this area, and with the Marine Task Force Delta in this area. On the 15th of this month, we started Operations Hastings by inserting 2 battalions in this general area. We had reason to believe that there was a division command post in this area, and our purpose was to find it and to destroy it.
This is the first time American Marines fight the North Vietnamese Army head-on, and it will cost them more than 100 dead and leave one river valley with a name no map ever prints, but every Marine who survives it remembers. The story of Operation Hastings is the story of how the war along the northern border stopped being a possibility and became a permanent fact. To understand why the Marines end up fighting a conventional division in the jungle, it helps to see what they had been doing before. Through 1965 and into early 1966, the Marines in I Corps, the northernmost of South Vietnam's 4 military regions, are focused largely on pacification. Their war is about the populated coastal lowlands. It is about clearing villages of Viet Cong, protecting the rice harvest, and winning over a rural population. It is patient, grinding, political work, and the enemy is mostly local, mostly irregular, and mostly hidden among civilians. That war does not go away in the summer of 1966. It is simply joined by a second war of an entirely different character in the empty hills to the north. That second war takes shape along the demilitarized zone, the buffer roughly 6 miles wide agreed at Geneva 12 years earlier, neutral by treaty and quiet by assumption. By July, the North Vietnamese Army has decided the assumption no longer holds, and the response the Marines mount will be the largest American combat operation of the war up to that point. The first signs come in late June. Marine reconnaissance teams in the rugged country south of the DMZ are no longer bumping into guerrillas in black pajamas. They are finding uniformed soldiers in disciplined formations, well equipped, and clearly part of a conventional force. The picture sharpens on the 6th of July, when troops of the South Vietnamese 1st Division capture a North Vietnamese soldier near a terrain feature called the Rock Pile. He identifies himself as a member of the 812th Regiment of the 324B Division, and he says the rest of the division has crossed into the south as well. 3 days later, a lieutenant from the same regiment surrenders in the same area, and his information is more specific. The division's mission, he says, is to liberate Quang Tri province outright. This is a different kind of threat, and it demands a different kind of response. A guerrilla insurgency can be contained and worn down over years. A regular enemy division, perhaps 10,000 strong, sitting on the northern border with the stated intention of seizing a province, is a conventional military problem that cannot be ignored. If the 324B Division establishes itself in the south, it can anchor a permanent front along the buffer, threaten the city of Hue, and turn the northern frontier into a battleground fought on Hanoi's terms. The Marines in Vietnam answer to Lieutenant General Lewis Walt, head of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force. The reconnaissance reports convince him and his superiors that the North Vietnamese have moved across the line in real strength, and General William Westmoreland The overall American commander approves a Marine effort to find this division and drive it back north. The job falls to the 3rd Marine Division under Major General Wood Kyle. On the 11th of July, Brigadier General Lowell English, the assistant commander of the 3rd Marine Division, meets at the South Vietnamese 1st Division headquarters in Hue with 2 other men. One is General Ngo Quang Trong, the South Vietnamese Division commander, an officer whose competence American commanders will come to respect deeply over the next several years. The other is Colonel Sherman, who commands the 4th Marines. Together they sketch the concept. A Marine task force will push into the country south of the DMZ to run down the 324B Division, while the South Vietnamese launch a supporting operation, Lam Son 289, just to the south. The coordination matters. This is a deliberately joint design, and the South Vietnamese are not bystanders in it. They hold a flank. On the 13th of July, the headquarters element becomes operational as Task Force Delta, with English in command and Sherman as his chief of staff. English sets up his command post at Cam Lo. Under him are 4 infantry battalions, the 2 1 Marines, the 1 3 Marines, the 2 4 Marines, and the 3 4 Marines, plus an artillery battalion, the 3 12 Marines, and a collection of supporting units. On paper, it is a powerful force. The problem is never going to be firepower. The problem is the ground. The terrain of northern Quang Tri is about as hostile to a modern army as anywhere in Vietnam. The hills are steep and covered in triple canopy jungle, with growth rising 60 to 90 feet overhead that chokes off both visibility and movement. The river valleys cut through this country in narrow defiles, perfect for ambush and nearly impossible to observe from the air. It is the monsoon season. The rains come heavy and unpredictable, grounding aircraft and turning trails to mud. The roads are few and poor, which means that supply, reinforcement, and the evacuation of wounded will depend almost entirely on the helicopter, and the helicopter, for all its revolutionary promise, is about to demonstrate its limits in spectacular fashion. Intelligence has fixed the enemy's likely position with unusual precision. The 90th Regiment of the 324B Division, estimated at 1,500 men, is believed to be using the Song Gan River Valley, about 10 kilometers northwest of Cam Lo, as an infiltration corridor. The division's command post is thought to sit on Hill 208, overlooking the southwest end of that valley. The Marine plan is built around that intelligence. The 3-4 Marines will be flown by helicopter into the southwestern part of the valley to set up blocking positions and seal the back door. The 2-4 Marines will land at the mouth of the valley and sweep southwest along the high ground toward Hill 208, driving the enemy into the blocking force. The 2-1 Marines will secure the major base at Dong Ha. The 1-3 Marines will protect Cam Lo and the artillery, and the guns of the 3-12 Marines will cover all of it. It is a classic hammer and anvil. It looks clean on a map, and it almost never survives contact with the real world. The reality announces itself within minutes of the first landing. On the morning of the 15th of July, the assault opens the way most large air-mobile operations do, with violence delivered from above. A4 and F4 jets work over the intended landing zones with bombs and napalm, scorching the vegetation to clear space for the troops. At 25 minutes past 7, the artillery of the 312 Marines adds its weight, hammering the ground around the primary landing zone designated LZ Crow. Around 7:45, roughly 20 CH-46 Sea Knight helicopters carrying the first wave of the 3-4 Marines come in to land just under 10 kilometers northeast of the rock pile. The Marines stepping off those aircraft meet little resistance at first. The trouble is not the enemy, it is the landing zone itself. LZ Crow is simply too small for an operation of this size. As the Sea Knights crowd in, 2 of them collide and crash, and a third strikes a tree trying to avoid them and goes down as well. 2 Marines are killed and 7 injured in the pileup, and all 3 aircraft are too badly wrecked to recover. They will have to be destroyed where they lie. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sumner Vale, who watched it happen, recalled afterward that in the first crash the dead Marines had been killed by the helicopter blades as they were climbing out. It is a lesson learned the hard way, and it is the kind of lesson this operation will keep teaching. The gap between the elegant theory of vertical envelopment and the brute geometry of fitting heavy aircraft into a clearing the jungle was never shaped to provide. Then it gets worse. Later that same day, another Sea Knight, carrying reinforcements from the 2-1 Marines, comes in underground fire from the ridge on the south side of the valley. Smoke fills the cockpit, the pilot overshoots, and the aircraft crashes on the edge of the command post area, killing 13 men. By the end of the first day, 4 helicopters lie shattered in and around the landing zone, and the men on the ground have given the place a name. They stop calling it the Song Gun. They call it Helicopter Valley, and the name passes from one unit to the next until it is the only name that matters. It is worth being precise about what that name means, because it is easy to assume the enemy shot all 4 aircraft out of the sky. He did not. 3 of the 4 came down because the landing zone was too small, not because of hostile fire. But the lesson is the same either way. This terrain extracts a price for every movement, and the helicopter, the very thing meant to let the Marines bypass the ground, is as vulnerable to that ground as the men it carries. With the troops down, the plan goes into motion, and the texture of what the enemy has built here becomes clear almost at once. Companies K and L of the 3-4 Marines begin setting up blocking positions around LZ Crow, while Company I stays in reserve. Company K, under Captain Robert Mudrzejewski, follows a trail along the bend of the river and runs into snipers hidden in the vegetation, and then overruns something no guerrilla band would have built. Mudrzejewski described it plainly. Underneath the jungle canopy, we found a complete 200-bed hospital in a bamboo building, about 30 yards long and 20 yards wide. One man was guarding it, and we shot him. Inside, we found 1,200 pounds of small arms ammunition being guarded by 3 men. We shot them too. This is not a guerrilla way station. It is the infrastructure of a division settling in for a serious campaign, and finding it confirms everything the prisoners said. Company K pushes on toward its objective, a ridgeline south of the river, but when the Marines try to cross the Song Gan, they are thrown back by heavy fire, losing 3 killed and 5 wounded, and the company digs in for the night a couple hundred yards from the water. By now the North Vietnamese understand that an American battalion has landed in their midst, and they react the way a disciplined regular force reacts. They attack. Through the evening of the 15th, the 3-4 Marines come under sustained small arms, machine gun and mortar fire. By 7:30 Val reports he is surrounded. The fire slackens. Then at 8:15 a reinforced enemy company throws itself at Company K's lines, and the fight runs nearly 3 hours before the attackers fall back. Mudrzejewski remembered the darkness and the cost he counted at dawn. It was so dark we couldn't see our hands in front of our faces, so we threw our trip flares and called for a flare plane overhead. We could hear and smell and occasionally see the NVA after that. But in the morning we found 25 bodies, some of them only 5 yards away, stacked on top of each other. The next night the enemy comes again, and again it is Company K that takes the weight, holding through 3.5 hours and 3 separate assaults, one of them reaching within 5 meters of the Marine line. Mudrzejewski credited the artillery and a flare ship that stayed overhead all night with keeping his company from being overrun. When his men searched the ground at first light, they counted 79 enemy dead. A clear picture is emerging from these first engagements, and it is not the one the planners drew. The hammer and the anvil both exist, but the enemy is not a herd to be driven between them. The 324B Division is a trained, aggressive force fighting from prepared positions on ground it knows intimately, and it intends to make the Marines pay for every hill. For the next 2 days, the 2 battalions in the valley have little contact, and English decides to pull them out to the northeast rather than keep battering across the river. On the 18th of July, as the 3-4 Marines begin to withdraw, Company K stays behind to cover the engineers destroying the captured ammunition and the 3 wrecked helicopters. That is the moment the enemy strikes, first with mortars, then with massed infantry. The hardest hit falls on Company K's 1st platoon, under Staff Sergeant John McGinty, which has become separated from the rest of the company. McGinty's account captures how close it ran. We started getting mortar fire, followed by automatic weapons fire from all sides. They were blowing bugles and we could see them waving flags. Charlie moved in waves with small arms right behind the mortars, and we estimated we were being attacked by 1,000 men. We just couldn't kill them fast enough. Matuszewski tried to fight his other platoons through to McGinty while calling air and artillery in dangerously close, the bombs and napalm landing 50 yards from his own men. He remembered a detail that says everything about how confused close jungle fighting becomes. I remember one kid shouting, "Here come some more Marines," but they weren't Marines at all, they were NVA, and when they saw us, they ducked into the river on our flank. All we could see was their heads and their rifles above water. It was like shooting pumpkins. Marine reinforcements finally won fire superiority and relieved the pressure, and McGinty's survivors withdrew, carrying their wounded but forced to leave their dead behind. Of the 32 men in his understrength platoon, 8 were dead and 14 wounded. The whole action cost the Marines 14 killed and 49 wounded. Enemy dead were put at 138, with estimates running as high as 500. Both Matuszewski and McGinty would receive the Medal of Honor for Helicopter Valley. The bodies left on the 18th were recovered 3 days later, when Company H of the 2-4 Marines came back through the valley. What the Marines found there said something about the enemy they were fighting. Captain John Hilgers, the company commander, described it. The startling thing about the whole situation is that none of the bodies had been disturbed. They all had their weapons. The Marine lieutenant still had his pistol, binoculars, and wristwatch. The helicopters had not been touched. The 324B Division was not a force of scavengers. It was a professional army that had simply moved on to the next fight. The single most costly episode comes on the 24th of July, on a piece of high ground designated Hill 362, about 7.5 kilometers north of the rock pile. The 3-5 Marines, now drawn into the fight, locate a North Vietnamese battalion in the area, and Lieutenant Colonel Bronars orders Company A, under Captain Samuel Glas, to climb the hill and set up a radio relay station, a kind of unglamorous communications task the broken terrain makes necessary. Glas' men reach the crest around noon without much trouble. Then the 2nd platoon moves down the far side to establish forward defenses, and the hill comes apart. The North Vietnamese have been waiting in concealed positions in the towering growth, and they open fire at close range with rifles and machine guns. The 2nd platoon is cut to pieces in the first moments. Into that fire runs Lance Corporal Richard Pittman of the 1st platoon, who grabs a machine gun and pushes forward alone to cover the survivors as they pull back toward the crest. Pittman's stand buys the time the platoon needs to withdraw, and it will earn him the Medal of Honor, the 3rd awarded for Operation Hastings. But the dead and the worst of the wounded cannot be brought out, and they are left on the slope. Lance Corporal Raymond Powell, one of the wounded men, survived only by playing dead as the North Vietnamese moved through the bodies. They went through, methodically shooting anyone who moved. It was darn near like a massacre. I pretended I was dead when they got to me. They took my cigarettes and my watch, but they didn't shoot me. What happens next shows why this kind of fight is so lethal. The North Vietnamese turn their mortars on the Marines now clustered on the crest, placing rounds on each flank with deadly accuracy. According to a Navy corpsman who is there, most of the company's casualties come in the first few minutes of that barrage. The Marines dig in fast, which sharply cuts their losses afterward, but they can do nothing to stop the mortars. They simply have to endure them for 2 hours until a Marine UH-1E gunship from the squadron VMO-2 finds and silences the enemy tubes. Company K is sent to help, but it grinds to a halt 300 yards short of Company I, unable to advance through the fire even with air and artillery overhead. As if the enemy were not enough, Typhoon Aura arrives and dumps rain on the hill, which combines with the thick canopy to make the evacuation of the wounded an ordeal in itself. Engineers eventually have to be lowered through the trees to cut out a landing zone. The North Vietnamese kept assaulting through the night, closing to within 15 or 30 feet of the perimeter. Corporal Mark Whaley put the closeness in flat terms. The commies were so damn close we could hear them breathing heavily and hear them talking. When the accounting is done, Company Y has taken roughly 100 casualties on Hill 362, 18 dead and 82 wounded, out of a company that began the operation with about 180 men. One Marine company has lost more than half its strength in a single afternoon. The men they fought paid as well. The Marines count 21 enemy dead on the hill and recover mortars, rifles, a machine gun, and a recoilless rifle, along with 2 prisoners. It is worth pausing on the conditions these units face, because the numbers only make sense against them. The fighting unfolds in triple canopy jungle where the enemy cannot be seen until he fires. The terrain channels every movement into predictable corridors the North Vietnamese have already registered for their mortars. Monsoon rain and a passing typhoon ground the aircraft and flood the evacuation routes. And every casualty, every resupply, every reinforcement depends on helicopters that the first day already proved are neither safe nor guaranteed. The 324B Division chose this ground precisely because it cancels so much of the American advantage. Through the second half of the operation, the close, sharp fights continue, but the larger trend begins to turn in the Marines' favor. On the 20th of July, the 1-1 Marines joined the 3-5 Marines in the valley, meeting light but persistent resistance from small groups as they sweep west. English orders the 2-1 Marines to set blocking positions at the western end of the valley, and on the night of the 21st, they are hit across their entire front and break up the attack with small arms, mortars, and artillery, losing 2 men killed and 13 wounded. The companies of the 2-4 Marines push through Helicopter Valley itself, recovering their dead and continuing the search. The fighting in these valleys could be strangely intimate. Lieutenant Colonel Arnold Bench, commanding the 2-4 Marines, described one engagement as among the most unusual of his career, watching 3 of his companies fight in the open ground below and around him, and controlling the whole action by hand. I was able to control the whole operation by arm signals, and as I stood there moving my arms, I could see North Vietnamese and Marines firing and falling. By this point, the question on the American side is no longer whether the enemy is present in force. It is whether he means to stand and fight or slip away. Here, the senior commanders disagree, and the disagreement is revealing. On the 22nd of July, Lieutenant General Krulak offers Westmoreland his assessment that the North Vietnamese are trying to avoid direct contact with the Marines. Westmoreland disagrees flatly. He replies, in the words of the official record, just the reverse was the case, and that the NVA forces were not seeking to get away. The intelligence picture is genuinely murky, and even at the top of the command, men with the best information available are reading the same battlefield in opposite ways. That ambiguity is not the failure of any one officer. It is the nature of fighting an enemy who can melt into terrain like this whenever he chooses. The last significant action comes on the 28th of July, and it points toward the future as much as it closes out the present. Even after the main battalions begin pulling back, the reconnaissance Marines under Major Dwayne Colby stay active in the area, working to a set of hard rules Colby had laid down. Stay together no matter what. Register artillery on known coordinates the moment you reach an observation post. Keep constant radio contact, and never sit in one spot more than 12 hours. On the 28th, one such patrol spots a column of between 150 and 250 North Vietnamese troops about 5 kilometers southwest of the rock pile. Rather than engage, the recon Marines call in artillery, and the strike kills at least 50 of the enemy. General Walt is impressed enough by the efficiency of it to give these actions a name. He calls them Stingray patrols, small teams acting as the eyes that direct the crushing weight of artillery and air onto an enemy who never sees them coming. Colby thought the pairing of recon and artillery one of the major innovations of the war, calling reconnaissance elements a truly deadly force in hiding among enemy units with this capability in hand. It is a technique that will be refined and used through the rest of the war, and it grows directly out of the lessons of this fight. By the time Operation Hastings officially ends on the 3rd of August, the 324B Division has either withdrawn back across the DMZ or dispersed into the jungle to the west. The mission, as defined, is accomplished. The enemy division's bid for Quang Tri Province has been broken, and its conventional presence south of the buffer disrupted before it could harden into a permanent front. The cost of that result is substantial, and the figures deserve to be stated plainly. American Marine losses come to 126 killed and over 400 wounded. The South Vietnamese forces fighting alongside them lose 21 killed and 40 wounded, and their contribution is real, not nominal. Estimates of North Vietnamese dead run higher, generally placed at around 700 to nearly 900. Those enemy figures, as with most body counts in this war, carry an asterisk. Counting enemy dead accurately in dense jungle after fights that often end with the enemy holding the ground is close to impossible, and the numbers are understood even at the time to be estimates rather than facts. The American and South Vietnamese losses, by contrast, are precise, because those are the men who do not come home. So what does Operation Hastings actually accomplish, and how does it fit into the larger arc of the war? In the narrow tactical sense, it is a clear success. The Marines locate a regular North Vietnamese division, fix it in place, and drive it back north, inflicting heavy losses and capturing significant supplies, including the 200-bed hospital that shows how seriously the enemy intended to settle in. Much of that result came down to supporting arms. Over the course of the operation, Marine artillery fired nearly 34,500 rounds, attack aircraft flew more than 1,600 sorties, and the helicopters of MAG-16 flew close to 10,000. General English, who had commanded a battalion on Iwo Jima 2 decades earlier, measured the difference in plain terms. "I was a battalion commander at Iwo Jima," he said, "and I didn't get anywhere near the support I was able to give these Marines here." General Walt's assessment of the men his Marines fought reflects a hard-earned respect, and it also explains why the enemy lost so heavily. "We found them well-equipped, well-trained, and aggressive to the point of fanaticism," he wrote. "They attacked in mass formations and died by the hundreds. Their leaders had misjudged the fighting ability of US Marines and AFGAN soldiers together. That is not propaganda. It is the considered judgment of a commander who has just watched a professional enemy fight from prepared positions and refused to break easily, and who understood that the same mass tactics that made the 324B Division dangerous also made it vulnerable to American firepower. But the deeper significance of Hastings lies in what it reveals rather than what it destroys. The North Vietnamese have demonstrated that they do not regard the DMZ as a constraint in any meaningful sense. They will move regular divisions across it whenever it suits them, and they will keep doing so. The Marines have pushed the 324B Division back, but they have not removed the reason it came, and they have not closed the door it walked through. The enemy can rebuild and refit north of the line and return. That recognition produces an immediate and consequential decision. 3 of the Marine battalions stay in place after Hastings ends, and within days they are under fresh attack from the same 324B Division, which has not gone far. The American response is to launch a new operation on the very day Hastings concludes. They call it Operation Prairie, and unlike Hastings, which was conceived as a sharp action of a few weeks, Prairie is designed from the start to be long-term and continuous. It covers the same ground, fights the same enemy, and runs in phases all the way into the middle of 1967. This is the most telling consequence of the whole affair. A 3-week operation gives way to a campaign that lasts the better part of a year, because the conditions that created Hastings, a porous border and an enemy willing to cross it in force, never change. The Marines have won the battle and inherited a front. From this point forward, American leadership orders a steady buildup of Marine forces along the DMZ that will continue through 1968, drawing units away from the pacification mission in the south and committing them to a conventional defense of the northern frontier. Places that meant little before Hastings, Con Thien, Khe Sanh, the Rockpile, will become fixtures of the war's vocabulary over the next 2 years. Operation Hastings, then, is less an ending than a beginning. It is the moment the war along the northern border stops being a possibility and becomes a permanent feature of the conflict, the point at which the Marines learn that their war will be fought on 2 fronts at once, against the guerrilla in the village and the regular division in the hills. And in the summer of 1966, the second of those wars has only just begun.